let's make a start. Right, so thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for those of you who've come back for more. This is the latest in BGSS's Agile Surgery series. We've had a little bit of a break due to the pandemic, but this is our first session since the break. This session's been recorded, so if you want to go back and recap and review it later, feel free to access the recording. So this is an interactive session. Please be respectful when we're talking and discussing things. You'll know when the interactive segments are when you see the icon in the top right-hand corner of the slides. Because it's interactive, we will not be having a Q&A session at the end, as we're having a conversation as we're going, obviously. So who are we? BGSS are a privately owned innovative technology consultancy. We've been around for about 30 years, solving complex technical problems for our clients. We offer end-to-end capability from strategy through to managed services. We work on long-term collaborations with clients, delivering solutions and providing real results for them. We're experiencing rapid growth. We have approximately about 2,000 consultants working over the UK, Europe, US, and Australia. Okay, so today's presentation is all around anti-patterns and when you feel that Agile's been done for Agile's sake. We'll start off with a brief introduction to the panel, and then we'll have a chat around what we mean by smells and anti-patterns, and then we'll be going into a series of scenarios, and that's when the real discussion starts. And finally, we'll wrap up the session at the end. So ask Sam to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sam Ockwell. As it says there, I've been a business analyst for over 10 years. Lose count after 10, don't you? I've been with BGSS for about 2.5 years now, working within the healthcare industry on an HSD project. Vicky?
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. My name's Vicky Bussey. I'm a business analyst with BGSS. I've been here about 4 years now, primarily working on healthcare and financial projects. I've got over 10 years experience. As Sam says, once you get to 10, you kind of forget. And also I'm really interested in Agile. Most of that 10 years has been using Agile Scrum methodologies. So really keen to get some more discussions going. Thank you. Over to you, Carl.
Hi, I'm Carl. I'm a BA, have been for nearly 20 years, so I'd rather not delve into that. I've worked in a variety of markets, and I've been with BGSS. This is my first year, really enjoying it and living up to the challenge of working on a retail program. So, as an introduction to what we're talking about today. Ever worked in a project or in a team where things are being done in an agile way, people are delivering, but you get the feeling that people are just going through the motions when it comes to things like ceremonies and stuff like that. You may even have someone who's nominated as being a PO or maybe named as a Scrum Master, but something's not quite right. It's as if they're not really buying into the spirit of things, they're just using the ceremonies because they know that's the done thing. It may be that they don't haven't really got a grasp of it before now, or it might be been doing the same thing for that long that it all becomes a bit stale. Essentially, you're looking for they're not really being in the spirit of things. In other words, you think you're going to get the Rolling Stones, but you've ended up with the Monkeys. So what we're talking about here is basically Agile Smells, or anti-patterns as they often now refer to. A good definition of anti-pattern is one we've got from Andrew Coing. An anti-pattern is just like a pattern, except that instead of a solution, it gives something that looks superficially like a solution, but isn't one. And like I said, you can look in the documentation for this kind of stuff. It's online, they've been around for a long time, and they're quite pervasive. They cover all sorts of different parts of working in projects and all different manners. So, first bit of interaction. I've had a search online of some different types of smells may have experienced in the past. So let's have a look at Wikipedia's Big Fat Anti-Pattern Quiz of the Year. Okay, so I've got a few selected smells here that I took from Wikipedia. Over to you guys. What do you think bicycle shed actually means? Anyone?
Well, yeah, park something and you leave it out of the way.
Yeah, could be. Could be. Anyone else?
Did it come from like when they were building like a nuclear power plant or something? They just focused on the bike sheds and not actually like containing the uranium, or I don't know, like focus on proper safety issues and things like that.
Could be. Could be.
Is it?
Sorry.
Oh.
I went too quickly there. Sorry.
No. I was just about to say giving disproportionate weight to trivial issues, but
yeah, I think George kind of got it with the focusing on the bike shed when you had a nuclear reactor to build. Yes, exactly. So the next one, mushroom management. Now I've heard of this one before. What do we think mushroom management is?
Kept in the dark.
Kept in the dark, yeah.
and have certain things thrown over you.
Sorry, Lee.
Too many managers, more managers than there is people doing the work.
Could be, yeah. Any other suggestions? Please don't look up Wikipedia whilst we're talking about this. Give it away. Okay, that's one is keeping employees in the dark and fed manure. Also left to stew and finally canned about decisions being taken. What about this next one? Moral hazard. Any advances on what we think that might be?
Well, you're not thinking of the impact of your products or what you're doing beyond just doing it.
Okay. Insulating the decision maker from the consequences of their decision. Okay, the next one's quite a popular one when we try this one internally. Seagull management. What do we mean by that?
Too much
Just picking the best bits.
Picking the best bits. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
getting crapped on.
Yeah. Yes. Anything? Yeah, quite close.
Making loud noises.
Yeah. You're getting the general gist of it. Yeah. Management in which managers only interact with the employees when problems arise, i.e. they fly in, make a lot of noise, dump on everyone, don't solve the problem, then fly out. Okay, what about Brooks Law? So this one's been bandied around in various places.
Adding people to a project which is already late will only make it later.
Wow.
Mythical man-months.
Almost textbook. Thank you, Murdo. Yes, exactly. Adding more resources to a project to increase velocity when the project is already slowed down by the coordination overhead. What about a death march? Quite a grim one, isn't it?
Where you know something's not going to work, but you just keep doing it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Any more on that one? No, okay. So yes, exactly. A project whose staff, while experiencing it to fail, are compelled to continue, often with much overwork by management in denial of the project's possible failing. I'm wondering if anyone's sat in their offices now thinking, I've come across some of these in the past. What about this last one then? Tester-driven development. Oh, hang on. Pressed the button too quick there. Anyone want to give their opinion what tester-driven development is?
It's a lot to do with when bugs and things like that create requirements for you.
Essentially, yeah. So software projects in which bugs, new requirements are captured in bug reports. Okay, so the essence of this is that the smells, it's another way of talking about things that aren't quite working right in your project. And like I said, these have been around for a while, and you've probably heard of other ones, you've probably encountered other ones. It may not be called this, but similar things, and they cover all sorts of different things to do with your project. But what about where the Agile ceremonies themselves, or the Agile practices themselves, become the symptoms of the anti-pattern you're experiencing? So, saying before, you're you're not really bought into the ethos of the Agile Manifesto, and it just feels that you're doing Agile for Agile's sake. So we're on to the real interactive bit now. We're going to have a look at some scenarios in where these things may happen and have a discussion around how we can improve on what there is there. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you.
I'll click when you ask me to.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've always wanted to say next slide. Okay, cool. Thank you. So as Cal said, we're working, while being there, working as part of a development team. Someone sent us invites into our calendars for all these marvelous Agile ceremonies. And it's like, that's great, isn't it? And is that all we have to do? Is that it? Are we done? But sometimes things don't go right. Ceremonies are not running as they should be. I'm sure we've all encountered this. People were just going through the motions and not actually driving anything. This is very much an open discussion. We've come up with some scenarios, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. I know I have been through them. Next slide, please, Carl. We'll crack on. Thank you. So the first scenario is where Scrum Master's holding a retro for the team. They're just going through the motions, rock up, and it's like, well, what went well, what didn't go so well, and they're giving input, but that's about it. And they don't feel actually the retro is adding any value. So anybody got any ideas on what pointers we can give to get our retro back on track? We have some options. Carl, do you want to? Thank you. So for retros, obviously making sure actions are taken when issues are raised and enable the prioritization of these issues. So, they can go raise tickets, put them in your sprint, get them in planning. If things are really causing blockers, that would be really good, and that's really helpful. Keeping a record of the retro, I find really helpful as well. So we can reflect back in case problems arise again, and it's the same problem. We can look back at that, which is good, and it just improves that engagement and collaboration with the team very much so, because you may find that you're having an issue and you've had an issue this sprint when actually someone else on your team has had exactly the same problem. And I think the other things that we've done at Retro is for people to vote on the one that they feel they'd like to tackle first, and which is causing most aggro, and the most important one, which has always been good as well. So at least you can target and prioritise and go, we'll aim to try and sort that in next sprint and rectify that, which I find is really good as well. So I don't know if anybody else has any views on retros and what's worked well for them.
I would add to that as well. Keeping a record of a retro. Sometimes we have things that come out in a retro that the immediate team can't deal with because it's a dependency. Keeping a track of that dependency impacting your team, sprint in, sprint out kind of thing, actually is a really good indicator. So to say, look, listen, we need some help, we need some escalation, etc. So keeping a record, it's a really valuable tool later down the line and in retrospect of a retrospective, if that makes sense.
Cool. I know I've struggled with it when with the pandemic and that we're having to do things virtually a lot now, obviously. That I struggle sometimes with the engagement. So I don't know if anybody's used any really good tools or to get people. I think one of my delivery managers used a boat one, which was quite good as to what's sinking and what's making the boat move faster. So I don't know if anybody else has used any tools like that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on. Sorry. I like to bring in stuff that ties in with kind of awareness weeks and things like that. So I facilitated some around when it's been Pride, or when we've had ADHD awareness, things like that, or mental health weeks, and just kind of bringing some stuff in that helps kind of people be aware of other stuff that might be going on and getting knowledge around that. So it's kind of related to that as well, and that's always gone down quite positively because people are learning as well at the same time.
That's a really good tool to like mix up the retro, so it's not exactly the same every week as well. I really like that.
Yeah, hi. I was going to say, yeah, switching up the format is very important to keep things interesting and keep people engaged. I personally use a tool called Team Retro. It has a lot of different templates that I can create my own as well. You can do health checks too, apart from retro. So I found it useful. I really like your first point here to make sure that actions are being taken, because if they're not, then people don't find any point of, in attending those. So that's super important. And I think there's something around looking at how comfortable people feel to share their opinions there. So looking at who is attending, maybe the dynamics between them. And a lot of times you might even want to make it anonymous to make sure that people can be as open as possible.
No, yeah, that's a really good point, Julie, because you find, especially as well, when we're not in a room, because obviously, you can read people, can't you? But when we're not in a room, and it's like people turn the cameras off, and it's like,
yeah. And also, some people by nature are more timid than others, and it's totally fine. But so this might help,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. That's I do miss the interaction in a room face to face, because you potentially catch the puzzlement on people's look, on people's faces, or them pointers, and have that a lot at the minute.
Do people feel that it's, sorry to interrupt, do people feel that it's reasonable to demand participants have their cameras on?
That's a good question.
No. I think it's good to ask if that to say that it would be nice if that's how your team works, if that's the culture of the team, but to demand, I personally wouldn't ever demand this. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear what everybody else thinks.
In my experience, I've had a situation whereby I had to negotiate with a team. So normally would spend an hour in retros, but as a trade-off, they all agreed they'll put their cameras on, but then could we have 45 minutes retro? So what was a case of trading off? Do we do 1 hour and keep it optional for people to have their cameras on, or do you want to do 45 minutes and get that engagement by having people turn their cameras on? So
that's a really good point. It's around gauging the team and how they interact. And if you're more productive without the cameras on, then maybe go down that route. And
more productive in what sense?
That you're getting people engaged, that people are raising issues, and they're engaging in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a Scrum Master, though, it's part of our job to read a room, and if we're doing that virtually, then it's quite difficult to do it if the cameras are off. I know the pandemic forced me out of the comfort zone, and now I think it's vital for Scrum teams to have their cameras on. I know I've been able to spot maybe some devs or team members feeling down over the pandemic, and I wouldn't have been able to clock that body language if the cameras weren't on. So I do think, as we work across, I work across 3 different shores, so it's vital that cameras are on.
I've come across some very legitimate, very serious mental health issues whereby people don't want to have their cameras on, and I absolutely want to respect those as well. I think, ensuring the team can open up to you and at the very least talk to you in private about why they definitely don't want to do that, and why we wouldn't want to make it mandatory such that it didn't seriously impact their mental health. Yeah. Hopefully those issues are few and far between, but they definitely do exist.
Okay, cool. Thanks, everybody.
Can one person have that much impact? Would the other stakeholders there, the business and the product owner, have some input into the feel of the retro? Would it be purely down to the way the Scrum Masters are organising it, that it would feel as though it's not adding value?
If the intention is to get buy-in to the retro, then would it be a good idea for the Scrum Master to take on such suggestions and make it open to people.
Yeah, because I've often found that when PO or other stakeholders are involved, sometimes the Scrum team can become more reserved and kind of withhold certain opinions that they would more readily kind of put forward when it's just the Scrum team.
As well, for me in a delivery team, that retro is for the delivery team to inspect itself, and the senior clients, stakeholders might not necessarily be part of that delivery team in the day-to-day Scrum delivery. So yeah, I would agree that inviting those would change the dynamics, and I've seen that.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. We'll move on. Next slide, please, to the next one.
Okay.
So we're into sprint planning now. So I've experienced this. So we're in sprint planning, and well, tongue in cheek, after 2 hours, one of the developers falls asleep. However, I have been told that has happened to somebody, and apparently there's still 2 more hours left of the meeting. So the question is, how can we make sprint planning more effective? And is 4 hours too long? Because I've read an Agile book and it said you should have your sprint planning for 4 hours. And personally, I was like, no, really? So I don't know about you guys. I mean, mine usually lasts about just short of an hour. So I don't know about you guys with your sprint planning.
Yeah, definitely 4 hours is way too long. There's no way you can keep people engaged for that long. Even if it's a 1 month sprint, as a Scrum guide says, we still have to be kind of realistic about it. Yeah. I don't think I can talk for that long. I don't think I can keep that energy. So definitely 4 hours is too long. If we do require that much time to plan, it would be the approach of breaking that down and, continuously plan as we go in the sprint. It shouldn't be, I wouldn't say a full 4 hours long meeting for the planning, no.
Yeah.
Could I just add to this? I was wondering, we're presupposing here that the Scrum Master is hosting the event. I'm a BA and I tend to, host the event. And I think given the digital world we all live in, we're all on screens most of the day now. I like to try and have a planning session where it's about 50 minutes to give people 10 minutes in their day before they run off to the next meeting, because I think we can be in danger of running from one meeting to the other. And going back to the cameras off, sometimes it's really hard to tell if people are like really desperate for a break. But if we think about school, I think lessons are about 45 minutes, something like that. So there's a reason why things should be shorter if possible rather than longer, I think.
Yeah, the last Scrum Master that I actually worked with was really effective at doing this, because prior to him joining, we were having really long sprint plannings and people were losing engagement and concentration. The way he actually remedied that was he would host more frequent and more kind of detailed refinements throughout the process of the sprint. So when it came to the point of us actually having a sprint planning meeting, the team were actually really well briefed on what exactly every individual story meant. And it was more of a formality to actually agree the scope of the sprint rather than necessarily to go through the acceptance criteria and the finer details of those tasks, because we'd really discussed them at length already throughout the course of the previous sprint.
Did having shorter sprint planning sessions improve the team or the group's morale or engagement with what they're doing?
Yeah, definitely, because 4 hours, I think, as some other people have already said on this, it's a long time for anyone to hold their concentration, even the Scrum Master or anyone else for that matter. So I think when everyone feels that they're already very clear on the scope of everything, then yeah, definitely it is just a case of like, do we all agree that we think this is achievable within the scope of the sprint based on what we've already discussed? and people have had kind of time to digest all the information rather than it all just kind of being on the fly.
So are you essentially spreading out the same amount of time into a number of smaller fragments that people can actually engage with?
Yeah, I think so to an extent, Margot,
That's what I do as well. Yeah.
I would just I would just like to add to that I think there's a very clear definition between what refinement is and sprint planning. And to be, to have your stories, enough stories in advance that you can see what's going into them, not just the current sprint, but also maybe 1 or 2 sprints ahead. So when it does come to sprint planning, the team are well prepared and they understand what those stories are. So sprint planning shouldn't be about defining what the stories are. It should already be known what the stories are. So it's really just about prioritization and making sure that everybody's happy with what's going into that sprint.
Yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah.
If anybody has any tips on how to introduce backlog refinement into teams that haven't necessarily done that before, that would be great.
Yeah, I was going to say with refinements, like I've been an ADM for many years and I've never done 4-hour sprint plannings. I try to keep them short because development teams don't really like meetings. They'd rather program. It's important, I think, with refinements to kind of coach the team so that they understand that they're not, this is not the time to solve the problem, but rather to understand the business context so that they're able to, they have a very clear understanding of what it is that is being asked of them, what the user need is when they pick it up. And what we do instead is we have kickoffs with like Three Amigos style, whenever someone is picking up the story, and that's when they go through the technical details and everything else. So this way refinements are not super long, sprint plannings are definitely not long, and you don't have the whole team contemplating on one ticket for ages.
Yeah, I would say in terms of introducing refinement sessions in, I would start with the sprint planning session and work backwards in terms of your cadence. So then you could be looking at, right, okay, I'll do a sprint. If my sprint planning is every other Tuesday, then I'll do a refinement session for that sprint the previous Monday, and then maybe a catch up with the PO later on to make sure that we've got it all correct, and then work backwards so that when you know that once it's up and running, every time you hit the sprint planning session, you've got at least, say, 2 sprints worth of stories and tasks and whatnot already refined and ready to go. It can be quite tricky to set up at first, but once you've got over that initial hump and you've got it in the cadence, it just becomes part of the pattern of the work that you're doing.
I
totally agree with you, Carl. Sorry, I would just like to add something to that. I think the 4 hours, I would like us to remember that the recommended 4 hours is for the traditional 4-week sprint. Nowadays, most of us are doing 2-week sprints, so it shouldn't ideally be more than two hours for the sprint planning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. But yeah, going back to Emma's point about bringing in refinement to the team. So that was where I was when I first came onto this project. I never had a BA before either. So I'm sure they thought, what do we need that one? What do we need a BA for? And I'm sure they looked and went, great, she's put in yet another meeting. But I did go through their sprint planning and it took 3 hours. And yeah, even I was losing the will. So the team definitely losing the will, and I've only done it the once. And they're there every sprint for 3 hours. But then once they saw that actually it's really good to have that discussion about the stories and getting that refinement in place and everybody can chip in rather than, we used to have the technical lead raising a story like 10 minutes before planning and just chucking it in the sprint and nobody knew what it was about. And then when they see the knock-on effect that, do you know what, sprint planning now is down. And I know it's still another hour of their time, but they actually see it better that it's broken down, that it's an hour here and then a separate hour for sprint planning. And they can see that, oh yeah, it is a good thing because actually sprint planning is like really easy now and everybody understands the stories and this, we've got a prioritized backlog and it's a bit like, it works a lot better. But yeah, I'm sure at the beginning they thought, yeah, another meeting, cheers, but it does, yeah, got there. So yeah, Carl, what other options did we have? I know we've got refinement on there, haven't we? Oh, and the prioritisation by the product owner as well. Yeah, I mean, we did put in there sort of like a tongue in cheek that just change it to an hour, but as you say, then potentially if you don't do other things with regards to prioritisation and refinement, that you've still then got to have other sessions for sprint planning as well, and understanding your team velocity. I think is important, and how you're estimating your stories and how that ties in with your velocity really helps as well. But I know that can be difficult when you're first kicking off, because you don't know potentially what your velocity is going to be.
On top of that, Sam, and it's something that we touched on in the previous one as well, and it's overarching with all the Agile ceremonies, is getting that buy-in from the team and understanding your team and how they work, and adjusting. So not everything works for every team. So it's collaboration and it's visibility, and that backlog refinement is an important thing, just like the Three Amigos, so that your team understands what's going on, so that when it comes to sprint planning, it's oh yeah, we spoke about that the other day. Absolutely, let's put that in. And it's all about that collaboration and working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vicky. Should we move on to the next one, Carl? Cool. So stand-ups. So the scenario is product owners just getting fed up with the daily stand-ups. They're taking forever. Team are going into real detail about blockers and about what they're doing, and nobody's got a clear idea what on earth's going on and where they are with the sprint goal or the delivery. So any pointers on how we can improve the stand-ups?
For my team, what I do basically is I focus the team on the sprint goal or the stand-up. So instead of going through the normal 3 questions, we focus directly on the sprint goal. So everybody talks about the sprint goal, and then if there are any blockers, we'll move the blockers to the parking lot and we'll discuss.
So how does that, do you feel that you get engagement from everybody in the team with that, when you're the goal focus as opposed to individual focus with the normal 3 questions?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You know, because everybody's willing to participate, especially since you've created that atmosphere where there's total collaboration, and you know everybody's focused on the sprint goal. So everybody's antenna is, you know, on towards achieving the sprint goal.
Nice. I'm just thinking of an experience that I've had recently where that's the focus that we had in the stand-ups, and we've actually recently changed it to the 3 questions, because we discovered there were 1 or 2 people that were just kind of hiding and not participating in the stand-up each day, and we switched it to the 3 questions to make sure that there was more of an individual focus, so that we could understand if they needed help understanding anything, that kind of thing. So it was, yeah, it's really interesting and really good that you've got that collaboration in your team as well, so that you can.
And again, why I stopped using the 3 questions was, you know, people tend to talk about some irrelevant things. Yesterday, I had a meeting with so I had another meeting with so which basically doesn't have anything to do with the sprint goal. So you need to keep them focused on the sprint goal.
Yeah. People found with doing it virtually, because obviously people are not in the office, so they're not chatting as much, that their stand-ups have got a bit longer, that people are tending to veer off more than they did when they were in the office. I don't know.
I think it goes without saying that it's very important to time box the daily scrum. Ideally, the daily scrum shouldn't be more than 15 minutes. And irrespective of the pattern you're using, whether the 3 traditional questions or not, time boxing is really key.
Yeah, and we to add to that, we did it by actually just time boxing each individual as well. So by time boxing the whole event and then dividing that by the number of individuals, and then we were also quite strict on on actual kind of discussions. So rather than it being a discussion, it purely serves as an update. So it's a status update where people can actually state their status rather than have an open discussion. If it was a case of, you know, I need assistance from person A, then that was kind of taken as a note by the Scrum Master to ensure that that conversation was facilitated, but not during the stand-up. The stand-up was just there to serve the purpose of updating the whole team on progress.
Yeah.
I think there are two parts to this scenario here. The fact that they don't have a clear idea of what's going on. So I think that's something completely different. But if the focus is on a daily scrum, which is the length of time that is being put in, I think just trying to get a team to be concise in terms of what they're working on in the sprint. Do they have impediments and their progress? And then keeping the overall thing, keeping the sprint goal in mind. So what I tend to do is walk the board, but people would only call out the stories that they have problems with. So in my own team, making phone calls is actually, trying to get people on phone call is actually part of what they're doing. So if they cannot get people on a call, that could be an impediment for them. So it's just more about focusing on the stories on the board, if they have impediment or any concern they would like to call out, rather than going through the 3 questions or keeping the sprint goal only in mind. The task at mind, the sprint goal and impediments would be the main thing. Okay. And then of course, having like a parking lot call for further discussions if required.
Has anyone found there been an impact on team morale through the daily stand-ups whilst we've been working virtually? So catch your mind about when you've been working in the office, everyone musters together ready for the sprint, for the stand-up, there's a bit of chat going and it gets people, engaged with each other and stuff like that. Do we run the risk of, because we run them virtually and we log on specifically for this meeting, we are trying to keep the meeting time box, we're focusing that, we are sort of losing that time in minute or so before or after a meeting where people naturally would have talked when they were in the office? Anyone got thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, definitely. The fact that we're working remotely has significantly impacted on the collaboration within the teams. We can't overrule that. So again, what I try to do, I create, different meeting rooms for catch-ups, like tea, like during the tea time, for instance, you invite people to come to maybe just spend 15 minutes on Zoom just to discuss and chat generally. So I kind of, interest my team in such little of activities, to make the collaboration as it used to be, make it as much as possible as it used to be when we were in the office.
Yeah.
I think that's where the parking lot call comes in under as well. So I have a custom parking lot call. So it's still the same meeting link for the daily scrum, but then people can opt to stay on the call if they want to have further discussions. And people who are not interested could drop off if they want. So, but at least it still gives the team that extra time to chat with each other regarding what they're doing or anything else they want to talk about.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to what we did on our last project I was on, where we had time aside after the stand-up to allow anyone who's picking up a new ticket, for example, to go through another 3 amigos kind of approach with the cell lead and the dev and the BA and tester and stuff like that. So yes, there are ways and means.
Does anybody have their stand-ups at the end of the day? I'm just, because ours are obviously first thing in the morning, and I don't know at the minute, especially with a couple of people on my team who live alone, so it's their first interaction with people is that stand-up call, so they like to talk, and I'm just wondering whether anybody has theirs at the end of the day, and whether actually they've done some collaboration, they've spoke with the teammates, and and they've done all that, so therefore potentially would the stand-up be quicker at the end of the day? When I don't know, I've never had a stand-up at the end of the day. No, don't think anybody else has either. Okay, that's fine. Okay, cool. Carl, do you want to? Yeah. What do we have? So I think we've gone through these as to potentially stick to a format. We had the 3 questions, or like we were saying, emphasize on the sprint goal, or just talking about tickets that you've been blocked with. And then a discussion takes place away from the stand-up if there's more information or more collaboration needed for that. And obviously the tongue-in-cheek one is obviously bribe people with biscuits. Send them biscuits to make their update short.
That's all part of the collaboration and forming a really good team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, thanks, Carl. So next scenario is product owner wants to invite a senior stakeholder to sprint review or show and tell, whichever you call it. But the product's not complete, the sprint goal hasn't been met. Development team are arguing that, well, now we should postpone that until the sprint, until we meet that sprint goal, and then we'll have something to show and something to demo. So should they still go ahead? Is my question. And what are people's thoughts on that?
That's a political, sorry,
go on, Mother. Sorry, go on.
That's a political question. The answer depends on the nature of the organization you're working in.
With the greatest of respect, though, for the development team, if they were left to decide when things are ready for the business, then you could be waiting a terribly long time. Now, I think in order for you to enforce that, dates have to be met and everything, then you need to enable the development team to have the relevant input at certain stages through all the kind of agile ceremonies, such as holding proper refinement, holding proper kind of sprint planning meetings and everything. But if everything is well organized and the development team throughout the course of the sprint and different ceremonies have the opportunity to input, then I think it really just comes down to the Scrum Master holding the team accountable to what's been agreed. Because really, if you've had an effective refinement, you've had a planning session where everyone agrees what's possible, then when push comes to shove, there's a commercial aspect of the product that needs to push forward, and therefore I think the show and tell needs to be met.
And I would also I would just add to that. I think it's about managing expectations. So, if the show and tell is not complete, then let the senior stakeholder be aware of that. They may not want to see it if it's not complete. Or if everybody in the team and the senior stakeholder understands that, the product is at a certain stage, then that's fine. So really to me, that's about managing expectations through the team and also with the senior stakeholders.
I think it's also worth in a team kind of fostering this idea that they don't necessarily have to be perfect. There's always this idea, they always want everything to be complete, and it's not worth showing our work unless it's completely done. And being able to kind of encourage them that their work, every iteration is valuable, and they need to be able to stand behind their iterations and, flaunt them and show what they're doing. And it's just a way to kind of build up their own, self-validation.
So for my teams, we have our team working agreement, and we already stated that, we will only demo what it's done. So we won't demo anything that is not done. But then that doesn't mean we should postpone the sprint review, because the sprint review is not just about the demo. It's about, there's so many other things you could talk about in the sprint review. So we could go on, talk about what we faced, why the story is not yet done, what the impediments are and everything. We could tell them, and then we will get some feedback based on that as well from the stakeholders. But then, we won't demo what's not done.
Yeah.
I think in addition, somebody said it's about the stakeholders understanding, having their expectations managed. And it's true, you don't want it to be like laws and sausages where you don't want to see how software is done. You just want it to pop out the end. It's useful for a stakeholder to understand the process and how it bumps along at various points. But it's also useful for the team to actually see the stakeholders' commitment to the process and understand how it fits into. It's very easy for developers to sit in a little technical bubble without thinking about what's going on outside the 15 lines of code they're concentrating on, and seeing the stakeholders' reaction or how they talk about it gives them a better understanding of how they and the project fits into the business. But you have to have that understanding on both sides of how things actually happen, rather than this idea that when something's ready, it's complete and perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Managing the stakeholders' expectations is very crucial, because again, you don't want to invite the stakeholders and then you show them that's something that is half done. And then now, why did you invite us to this meeting when you know it's not done? So you need to manage the expectation seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when on one of my first projects, we were dealing with a really awful legacy system, and once the devs got into it, realised that actually nothing was documented either. So there's, surely things are documented. No, they're not. So after our first sprint, it was like, actually, we've done sort of like really not very much development work at all, because a lot of it is, getting their knowledge up to speed and actually writing the documentation, which we shared with the stakeholder, and they were really happy that we were open and transparent about that, and it's paid dividends because now we're doing some further work on it now, and obviously we've got that documentation in place, so and for new people coming onto the team as well, so that was really helpful for us.
It's important to note as well, show and tell is not just about what development work that your team's done. It's about the whole team. You can still have a sprint review at the end of sprint 0 when you're just setting things up. It's a time to understand what we've done and showcase that, no matter what it is that you've done.
Yeah, and also I think on expectation management, I think cancelling meetings tends to sell the wrong message anyway. I don't think you should ever cancel a meeting if it's a regular session. If you haven't got anything to demo, then there's always something to go through. And like as someone said just then, I think you're better keeping your client in the loop with what's actually happening than pretending everything's fine and dandy and then cancelling when it's not, because I think that sends a far worse message than having a session where you can open up and say, look, we're deep in the setting up the development life cycle. We haven't got anything to demo, but what we're doing will lead us to be able to do this thing, and you can show roadmaps and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, you should never cancel a meeting.
Just on the sprint review, Chantel, just out of interest, I'm interested now. So usually for us, it's our PAR tester that gets thrown in to demo. Do you guys, does it depend? Does it alternate? Yeah, or is it always the same? Is it the same person?
I get the developers to do the demo. The developers demo what's actually developed. The product owner will do the introduction and everything, but then basically the developers actually talk about on the demo what they actually worked on.
Yes.
Yeah, same here.
Cool. Thanks. Cool. Okay. How are we doing for time? Do we want to do that? I know I squeezed another one in, or we can wrap up. Yeah, as I said, there's always value in showing the progress.
Yeah. Okay then. So, in terms to wrap up, today's session has looked at some of the smells around where Agile ceremonies are used without getting their true value. These are a type of anti-pattern which are common across all projects. While the definitions of some anti-patterns are quite common, the reality for each anti-pattern will be unique to your project or team. They can affect new teams as well as established ones. They can arise at any time. Things will go awry. This should be a given. By acknowledging this and keeping watch for it occurring, we can seek to address the smells as before they become entrenched. It should be the responsibility of everybody in the team to address these and identify them. All team members, irrespective of role and experience, should feel comfortable that they can raise their concerns, that they are listened to, and the team needs to work together to address them. The scenarios we discussed today are just examples. We are likely to encounter many more unique anti-patterns at work. What works for one team may not work for others. Hopefully, though, you'll come away from today's session with some new tactics to add to your arsenal to supplement your agility and to think on your feet and address any anti-patterns as they start to arise. Addressing anti-patterns are, like most things in life, an opportunity to learn, improve, and take your learnings forward onto your next project. So just the last few minutes, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. It's been a very informative session and I hope you've got a lot from it. There's a bit of a reading list there. You can have a look on the video and try and capture any of those things later. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.